Hi, thank you very much for attending our talk today. My name is Mohammad Tahai. I did this research with Marvin Ramakapone and Owais Rashid from the University of Bristol and Tian Shili and Jason Hong from Carnegie Mellon University. Why did we study advertising networks? About 77% of free Android apps contain an ad library, and that only includes ad libraries on Android apps. Considering this number and thinking about the whole mobile app development ecosystem, ad networks collect massive data from users, including sensitive data such as location data. Mobile app developers, on one hand, feel like they have to use these libraries because they enable them to make money. And on the other hand, some users find ads, especially personalized ads, creepy because, for example, they search about something on a website, and when they go back to a different website, they see some ads that are relevant to their initial search, which creeps them out because they feel like they are being followed and tracked. Or some users find ads discriminating because some ads might offer different prices to different users, and some people find ads in general intrusive. Because of laws and regulations, ad networks must provide options in certain regions to limit ads personalization. For example, in the US and in Europe, they have to give users options to make a decision between personalized and non-personalized ads. There have been many research trying to find out how these options should be presented to users so that they can understand them better and make an informed decision. For example, Carnegie Mellon University researchers designed this icon for CCPA. However, when we look at the developer side, there are also many options given to developers to turn off ads personalization. Yet, there hasn't been many research to study these interfaces. Here you can see three interfaces provided by ad networks from Facebook, Twitter, and Google, although Twitter recently sold their ad network to a different company. There are multiple ways of showing these kinds of options to developers, with code-level interfaces or graphical interfaces and choices. In our study, we wanted to better understand these options and information presented to developers. In a short paper in CHI 2021, we studied some of these interfaces and found that these options can be very tricky for developers to find and understand. And some of them even contain dark patterns. If you don't know what a dark pattern is, here is an example. This screenshot was posted on Reddit, so the user saw this interfaces when installing an HP printer. HP in the fourth option is asking users to turn on their location services and allow precise location. As you can see, users aren't given any options, but just to share their precise location, and they don't have any other options to cancel or say, I don't want to do this. If they don't want to do this, they have to just cancel the setup process and return the printer. So this interface really feels restrictive and limiting. We observe similar patterns in the ad networks on the developer panels. For example, the default options were set to maximize data collection, or the coloring and the order of the options were very much in favor of the platform and maximizing data sharing. As a follow-up study in this research, we wanted to answer three research questions. First, we wanted to understand how do ad networks present information about privacy regulations in their documentation? So we wanted to understand if we take GDPR, CCPA, and COPPA as some of the common privacy regulations, how are these regulations presented in the developer-facing documentation? And then we wanted to understand how developers find these ad networks support for complying with privacy regulations. And third, we wanted to understand how ad networks can improve their privacy regulation support for developers. We did two studies to answer our research questions. In the first study, we did a systematic review of the interfaces in which we exhaustively tried to find all the interfaces that contain some information about the privacy regulations. In the second study, we did think aloud with 11 mobile app developers to better understand developers' concerns, confusions, and recommendations to improve ad network support for developers. I'm going to talk about the findings briefly. Here you can see the results from the systematic review. We studied 3 popular ad networks: Google AdMob, Facebook Audience Network, and Twitter MoPub. Here's an example of the charts that we made. This is from Google AdMob. All the little colored circles show that there is some information in that interface or page about the privacy regulation. So you might notice the vast number of pages and how scattered the information is. Another point is that some of these interfaces are buried under multiple levels, which makes it very difficult for a developer to find. Here's a table that we created from the charts. So the first thing that you might notice when you look at this table is that there are many inconsistencies between these platforms, which means that developers have to do a lot of the work themselves to find all the relevant information. The information within each platform is also very inconsistent. For example, take COPA on Twitter MoPub. It has 6 pages, but for GDPR on the same platform, there are 18 pages, some with a code sample and some without a code sample. So overall, all the regulations are addressed very differently on each of these ad networks, and even within an ad network, each regulation has been addressed very differently. In the second study, we did think aloud study with 11 mobile app developers. They find it very difficult to understand the terms and the language of these ad networks around regulations and laws. Sometimes there is just so much detail on a page that no one wants to read those pages. And on the other hand, sometimes there was just no detail at all on some pages. So finding the right balance between the right amount of detail for developers is a challenge. On top of that, as we also found in a systematic review, it's very difficult to find the relevant information about privacy regulations. Sometimes some of our participants gave up and said, I don't know where to find the information about this specific term or topic. As with the previous findings, sometimes the information was buried under multiple levels and scattered in many different pages. Some of the strategies that our participants said that they will use to make their applications compliant with the regulations were, for example, just following the documentation. For example, P4 said, Google has given us 2 keys or saving 2 values. I would just use those values in my app if it's just children directed, and I would just relax. Which really puts a lot of the burden on the documentation of these platforms and how much trust developers put on these platforms. For compliance checking, for example, P9 said, it's impossible to check for compliance because I want to make sure that my app complied with CCPA and COPA, but they hadn't given me any kind of information, like technical information on how to do it. What do developers want? They want to see videos. There are videos on these platforms about how to make an app functional or how to integrate an ad. But none of these videos talk about privacy regulations and privacy topics. They want to see more sample code. Of course, this is a classic. Developers want to see more sample code because that helps them understand what's going on, and potentially they can copy paste and modify the few values and get their app working. They want to see step-by-step documentation for privacy topics, very much like how ad networks currently have for integrating an ad, which is very nicely laid out, and everything is very nicely laid out. It has all the details step by step, so it would be nice to have the privacy information integrated in those documentation as well. They want to see easily accessible options, specifically graphical configuration, like a simple checkbox or some radio buttons. so that they can just select instead of changing something in their code. And finally, most of them want to see all the privacy related information in one place in a central panel. We find that overall, the information about privacy regulations can be very hard for developers to find. Compliance is a different topic. For now, we are just trying to find out if they can find the information or not. We find that understanding usability issues in these interfaces and improving them may facilitate performing privacy tasks for developers and take some of the burden off developers. We argue that these interfaces need to remove dark patterns and give transparent options to developers to enable them to make informed decisions for their users and their apps. Thank you for listening.